all that being said, let's go bring the guys on from Donaldson because it's now their time. We're going to talk about silicon in the oil, and I've got one plot before we start talking about filters. One thing you can see for certain is that the lower the silicon, the less dust that's in your oil, the least amount of wear you have. So lower dust, lower silicon means lower wear, which means longer engine life. So with that, let's get rid of that presentation. And let's bring on Gabe, Matt, John.
Hello, everybody.
You're all here, right? And Matt is like, he's got his arm all up. He had to have rotator cuff surgery. He's a trooper, man. He is here for everybody to show up. Let's start talking about. How you guys doing?
Hey, Lake.
Hey, Lake. Thanks for having us.
I'd have you guys. So I know we have a hard end for you guys at 5:30 Central Time. So that is an hour from now. So I don't want to waste any of your precious time because we got folks here who are in the comments watching. They want answers about filters for all the stuff. And you guys are the pros because I'm the motor oil geek, not the filter geek. So I'm going to let you guys run the show.
Well, I love that people have tuned in to listen to a bunch of geeks because we're the filter geeks.
That's awesome.
All right.
So, do you have your presentation ready to go?
I do, yeah. Do you want me to pull it up?
Drive away then.
All right, let's get this up here. And let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Is this? Oh, that is not. Oh, here we go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
All right, are we seeing it?
We are now.
We are. We're there.
All right, fantastic. So, Lake, the last video was, there were so many great comments. So what we thought we'd do is pulled a few slides together just as some visuals to help with the conversation. But we really wanted to kind of expand on some of the things people were talking about in the comments, some of the things that you and I talked about in that video. What we'll do, keep in mind, we're the diesel engine people, right? So we make filters that protect diesel engines. But what I thought was awesome was so many people in the comments, because you have so many viewers with gas engines, were asking questions about, well, hey, this stuff's cool, but how's it apply to my gas engine as well? So we'll have kind of a focus on diesel engines here, but on these talking points, we'd love to try and tie it to gas engines too and share some of our knowledge and how it might apply there. So, what I brought up here first is, you're wondering, why are we looking at rocks balance in here maybe? But I wanted to kind of
think the filter could stop something that big.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. Hopefully it does, or it's a really bad filter. But the reason I brought this in is because this is kind of a baseline of the whole concept of what we do when we design a filter. It begins with solving a problem. When we design a filter, it's going to go in an application somewhere, and it may be filtering, engine oil or fuel or hydraulic oil. Who knows? It could be anything. But it's to solve a specific problem. And it begins with filter media design, right? So when we design a media, and you and I talked about this in the last video a little bit, we have to find a balance of these things that you see here. So I think this is a nice visual because it helps explain it. But what we want to do, if we want to make a filter the best filter possible, we want to make it highly efficient, but also have a long life. So there's a bit of a balance there, right? If you make a filter too efficient, well, it may have a short life because it may plug up too soon. So if we get our media recipe right for whatever that application is, this is what we're doing in our brains. We're trying to balance that. We're trying to get high efficiency and long life.
Well, it's that trade-off to me is exactly what we see when you're formulating oil. If I want the maximum in terms of fuel efficiency, I'm usually going to pay a price for that in either how long that oil can last or how much deposit that oil builds up. Little nerdy thing here for everybody on the oil side. So there's an additive called GMO, which is glycerol monooleate. It is fantastic at reducing friction. So it's like the easy, cheap way to get fuel economy. But there's actually tests, there are deposit tests that are in the API standards that screen just to make sure you don't put too much GMO in the oil, because GMO is known to create deposits. So it's like, okay, yeah, I can do this, but then my trade-off is going to be that. So there's pretty much, it's always going to be a trade-off. And I feel like in chemistry, it's always that. It's always a balancing act. I'm always saying it's all about balance. It's not about having more of this, or less of that. It's about the balance. And I feel like you guys are showing the same thing right here, right? It's just a different principle.
Right.
In a different area, applying the same principles.
It's physics, right? And you can't dodge it. You can only hope to optimize and create that balance. And that's what Gabe is talking about here. Is typically what Donaldson is looking for is making an understanding that unique application need. Is it a tractor in the field and it's a lot of dust at harvest time, or is it a high performance engine in a mine site? Those are the types of applications we typically are focused on and zeroing in on to deliver the kind of protection, longevity of service, and throughput for that an engine needs from an air filtration perspective, or a lube or fuel tube.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you want to see something really cool, I brought along a picture here for you. Let me, Lake, how do you advance slides? For some reason, this is not going to the next one.
It should be right under the.
There we go.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So what you're looking at here is under a high power microscope, an SEM, an image of filter media. Specifically, this is air filter media. So if you take that kind of balance that we're looking for and you want to see how this works on a microscopic level, here's what's going on. What we do with some of our premium air filter medias is we design these tiny synthetic nanofibers. And on the right side, you're seeing a little layer of those. You see that layer on top of those fibers, of the big fibers that looks like a little spider web layer, and it's covering all those fibers? That's those nanofibers. What they're doing is trying to do something that's kind of unique in air filtration. And again, we talked about this in that last video just a little bit, but we want to try and capture dust more up on the top layer of the media. We call that surface loading is what we're going for there. And those nanofibers laid out like that help us do that. So on the left side, you're seeing what it looks like after it gets dirty, gets some dust loaded on it.
Right. Yeah.
Once that happens, well, then you get you start to build a higher efficiency. And then
because the dust attracts the dust, it basically starts to kind of be a dust magnet on the top, if you will.
Exactly. Dust magnet. I like that. That's exactly right. If you think about it, I kind of like to draw a similarity to like the lint trap in your dryer. The lint trap in your dryer, it catches lint, and when a little bit of lint builds up on that screen, that attracts other lint, and then it starts to build up, and you actually build efficiency on your lint trap, right? So we actually, if you get an air filter media recipe done right and find that balance, this is what it looks like. So by doing this, you're going to get long life out of this, because you don't pay that penalty like you're talking about. Like there's no free ride, right? There's some kind of penalty you pay. But if you can design your media with a good balance, you don't pay as big a penalty of flow restriction. And that's the key right there, is reducing that flow restriction. John, you
So
have
I
any?
know it's we're already rolling in the chat, all kinds of great stuff. People want to talk about bypasses. So I know we're going to have to get to bypasses sooner
Let's
or
do it.
later. So you're driving the PowerPoint,
there.
Gabe. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but just
Yep.
need to know.
Take a second.
You better get there before 6:30 rolls around Eastern time.
All right.
That's
We'll
right.
get the bypass. I promise. Before we move on, though, I want to take this air conversation just a little bit further.
Okay.
Because there's something really important to talk about. And it was big in the comments in the last video. Because if you think about what we're talking about right now, about how once you build a dust layer on that media, your filter becomes more efficient. I want to think about that for a second. If you take that to a logical conclusion, that means that a dirty air filter is actually a good air filter.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to take the conversation this way before we move on to the bypass, because this is something that we really like to educate people about. You should actually let your air filter run its full life. And full life is determined by, well, how much restriction to airflow do you have across it, right? That's the only way to tell when a filter's dirty enough is by something called an indicator. And I know on gas engines, you don't have these typically. It's coming in on like some light duty trucks nowadays, but for the most part, you don't have them on a gas engine. And that's unfortunate. On a diesel engine, you do. All modern diesel engines do. And they look something like this. I brought a little visual here to show you. It's just a little indicator. And what it does is it has a little sliding bar on it. This is just one example of many. They come in different shapes and sizes. But that simple little technology is just measuring vacuum pressure. It's on the downstream side of the filter. So that's the cleaner side. And it's measuring how hard is my engine having to pull air. And that little indicator, when this little guy turns red, and that tells you when to change out your air filter. Now, that's something that is very misunderstood in the industry. So we like to educate people on it because we want them to get the most life out of their air filter. And if they do, they're actually protecting their engine better because it's going to build efficiency, right? So it's going to let less dust through.
Efficiency graph with loading that we showed in that video, I mean, that was worth the price of admission right there.
Mm-hmm.
Just to see that, okay, well, yeah, whatever that target level is that they advertise that, but all the other, that as you feed in dust, it just keeps getting better and better and better and better. That it's not like the filter's getting worse over time. The exact opposite is true. The filter's getting better over time. I mean, that's the mic drop right there, man.
Yep.
And I think something to add to that too, and I saw it come up in the comments a couple times on the video was, well, okay, as that loads, you're sacrificing then the amount of air that comes through. Well, if you're using that restriction indicator, that is set up to the manufacturer spec for what that limit or that lower threshold of air volume that can come through is, and that's when that trips, right? So your initial clean air filter is going to provide way more air than is ever really required through that engine. And as you slowly start to load that over time, that indicator is set to be paired with that system. So it trips at the correct time. So you replace that filter before you get to a standpoint or before you get to that point where there would be too much restriction for that engine to actually run properly.
That's a great point. These are engineered in. The amount of airflow the engine requires is taking in to account for all that. So that's makes a big thing.
Yeah, I always like to remind people that it's not the filter people that say run it till the indicator turns red. It's the engine manufacturer that says that.
Yeah, and for people that are worried about, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that I'm seeing it come up in the chat of when is the right time to change, and our advice as filter manufacturers are follow the instructions of your equipment, right? And each manufacturer, each design for an engine or a vehicle has some guidelines, primarily based around that. changing on that indicator value reading is usually the best way to maximize your filter life. And doing that consistently allows you to protect your engine the longest, and minimize the amount of filter changes that are required for your engine to run with protection and per design.
Yeah, exactly. And what we see so often out in the real world, I'm talking at shops and dealerships, anybody working on diesel engines, we hear a lot that people don't trust the indicator. Here I hold it up again, this little thing here, simple technology. And it's something real common that people say is, well, I've never seen it turn red. We don't use them because we never see them turn red. So we get in some new trucks, and the first thing we do is we go out and we have the techs just pull those indicators and plug that port because we're going to go on a schedule only. That's okay. You can do that. But if you want to get the most life out of the filter, keep that indicator on and use it. And I'll tell you why people don't trust it is 9 times out of 10, it's because they just never ran their air filters long enough. It actually takes a long time. It actually takes quite a while. You can get a lot of miles or a lot of hours out of that filter before they turn red.
Especially if you're on highway. That can go a long ways. And it changes depending on what part of the world you're in. If you're in the Southwest and you get windblown dust, that's going to be much different than if you're driving around, say in the winter and the Midwest, right? That's going to play into it as well.
Yeah. And I saw a funny comment there. Noe ESP said he ran a filter in his truck for 10 years and sold it after 300,000 miles. You probably ran it a little too long.
Well, I think the other thing you can do too, if you're worried about the filter not filtering efficiently anymore, like you've gone to the other side where now it's damaged.
Yeah.
If you're doing oil analysis, you're going to see that.
Yeah.
Right. The used oil analysis is going to show up with the silicon numbers. Right. So if you see your silicon was good and all of a sudden your silicon spikes, then now that the filter media has been damaged, something like that. So if you kind of do both, and the restriction question, right? So let's go ahead and deal with that. And this is me. This is the world according to Lake. I'm not speaking on behalf of Donaldson right now. Unless you're running your engine at wide open throttle all the time, the air filter is not the restriction. The throttle blade is. All right. On your gasoline engine guys who are worried about that, your throttle blade and where it is, unless it's wide open throttle, that is not it. Most people are not driving their vehicles at wide open throttle all the time. If you're drag racing, if you're Daytona, Talladega, something like that, okay, different question. But for the average person, daily drivers, you don't need a high performance, high flow air filter. It's not going to help you. More than likely, if it doesn't filter as good, it will hurt your engine's ultimate longevity because, as we showed you on the graph earlier, a higher level of silicon equates to a higher level of wear. The number one most common contaminant that we see in used oil, and remember, I'm looking at hundreds of used oil samples each week. Silicon is number one. So pay attention to this.
Yeah.
This is big. So.
Yeah, that's wise. And I'm seeing a few comments about cleaning air filters, and I saw them on your last video too. I want to talk about that for just a second. I recommend being careful. We don't advise it. You run real risk of damaging that media. In fact, if you look at the chart that's up on the screen for a second, notice you see down on the bottom, each of those colored lines there is a different micron size. What I want you to realize is that you're talking about dust particles far, far, far smaller than anything you can see with the naked eye. And that's what's causing damage, to all those moving parts down in the bottom of the end of the engine. And your air filter is your first line of defense. after the air filter, if you got a turbo, it's going to see the turbo first. Then that dust is going to work its way eventually down the cylinder walls and down into the engine oil, and you get what Lake's talking about. You see it in the oil. But if you're cleaning your filter, you're running a risk because that shop air pressure, even if you turn it down, you're potentially damaging that media. You're talking about these tiny, tiny microscopic sized particles that can get through those little holes that you can't see that you're doing in the media. So we don't advise it. And, most engine manufacturers are going to void the engine warranty if you're running under warranty still. There's some exceptions to that because some of the heavy dust environment places, like some ag and some mining, some of the OEs will say, okay, you can clean an air filter on this engine like 1 or 2 times and then change it out. And that's because farmers at harvest, sometimes they have to clean it out in the middle of the field just to finish the day. Right. So it's rare that an engine manufacturer is okay with you cleaning an air filter. So I just want to point that out, that most of the time you're going to void your engine warranty because they know that it's dangerous too. So be careful with that.
Yeah, I've always been. It's if you look at the cost of engines today, and the cost of the vehicle today, your air filter is one of the cheapest things you could put on it, and it's literally one of the most important. So it's just better. And I know people are asking the question in the comments. I'm not going to slam on anybody. I'm not going to do that unless it's cheap, fake AI. Then I will slam all over it, right? But I don't recommend using a reusable, washable air filter. Look, the data right here is all you need to see, right? The best thing you can do is use a good, high quality, high efficiency filter and then run it to its useful life. That's going to give you better protection. You don't need high flow, you need high efficiency, and the longer you run it, the more efficient it becomes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I saw the comment in the chat here, kind of restating what you just said. Like, is the air filter is cheap insurance, so it's
absolutely
worth every penny. Worth every penny.
I mean, we said it in the video, and if you guys in the comments haven't watched the previous video that Gabe and I did about air cleaners, I mean, this is a true story, right? We were at Daytona. And we had these literally like gauze-like air cleaners because it would make a little bit more power with that higher flow filter. And it was basically just for qualifying. Being greedy, we decided to put it in the race. And we raced it. And by the end of the race, it looked like someone taking a shotgun and shot the media. It had holes all in it. Mm. And by the time toward the end of the race, the driver's saying, "Man, this thing doesn't go. It won't suck up in the draft. It won't go. It was running good at the beginning of the race." Well, what happened is you're at Daytona. You're down by the beach. There's sand all over that place. Mm-hmm. We sucked in so much sand that it had beaten up the valve seats. So our valve job was gone. And anyone that does airflow knows, like, you want to screw up the flow of your engine, screw up your valve job, right? Yeah. I mean, that's way more power than your air cleaner's ever going to give you is a good valve job. And we destroyed the valve job of the engine. And that was like, okay, learn that lesson right then. And that was 20 years ago. And it's like, all right, don't do that. It's just, we work with a lot of professional race teams. And when we're doing the oil analysis, we are looking for that silicon. And when we see the silicon go up, those dudes are jumping on the filter and they're working on the air box to make sure that it's sealed up, that it's not leaking past the filter, or what do they have to do to the media to get it right? Because they all know that in today's world, of today's racing, professional racing, it's about the durability of the power. It's not about making the most power right now. It's about how can I make power over time and maintain that. And proper air filtration is like at the top of the list of things we work on. And it's just, big time. I'll shut up.
No, that's good. And, I'm seeing comments about asking about things like cold air intakes on your daily driver. And we're definitely not saying don't do that. But like you said a minute ago, like there's really no free ride. You're going to have a little bit of a trade-off. So I like to think about it this way. If you're in your daily driver and you want to put a cold air intake and you want to tune that engine and get as much airflow as you can and all that, that's great. But consider something. If you live on a dirt road, or if you drive on a dirt road at all, I would never do that. If you're anywhere near a dusty situation, I would never, ever consider that on my daily driver. But if you're in a pretty good daily environment and it's not dusty, well, you might consider it, but just understand the risk. Those typically are not a high efficiency filter, so you run a little bit of risk. But I also want to tie one thing to a difference between diesel and gas engines. Your gas engine is going to be more tolerant in a lot of ways than a diesel engine. So when we design air filters, we're looking for maximum efficiency all the time because we're protecting diesel engines. So we design our medias for maximum efficiency as much as we can, and still try and get that balance of good flow, right? But your gas engine is going to be more tolerant of a lot of the contamination than a diesel engine is. So there's a little bit of a difference there. I know I'm not giving straight answers, but that's because there's not a straight answer. You got to decide.
Well, I just got to point this out. Since you started talking, Gabe, someone said, hey, this is really valuable. At J Gaines 1980 said, you know what? Super Sticker, this is valuable. But then Stephen Harris said, no, this is worth even more than that. It's $9.99. Here's $10. Because you guys are you're delivering, you're not asking for nothing. And then T. Dyson 175, $100. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, this community of people is just unreal to show up. And people are appreciating the fact that you're just giving them straight truth. You're not sugarcoating it, not marketing anything to them. It's just like, hey, here's what's the best path for your vehicle. So we're coming up on about 30 minutes left, and we've been on air cleaners, air filters.
Yep.
You know what we got to talk about.
Yeah, we got to get there.
Come on now.
We got to get there. Can I show you something real quick? Here's
yeah. Because somebody asked about pre-filters. Yes, this is great.
Yeah, and there's actually a bunch of questions coming through on pre-filters right now, so this is good timing. What we do in heavy, like medium to heavy dust environments, you're going to see on a modern diesel engine, they're going to have something called a pre-filter on them. That's something we design. Here's one type right here. If you think about it, we're just using physics to separate dust before the dust gets to the filter. And this animation's showing you how this style works. As those red arrows are showing the dirty air and the dust getting pulled in, that air forces this impeller to spin. So it's not motorized. It's just the airflow forces that impeller to spin. It creates a centrifugal force. Those dust particles are heavy, so they move to the outside of it. And then if you watch here, it ejects them out the side in a little ejection port there, right there. And then they go back out into the air. So, that's just using physics in a different way. And it helps make an air filter last longer. So that's where pre-filters come into play. And people are asking about it. Can you put a pre-filter on? Yeah, if you could fit one on, you could put it on. You're adding a little bit of restriction to flow there. So depending on the application, you may shorten the life of the air filter a little bit. I don't know without the application and trying it or running the numbers, but
But maybe the takeaway for that is these pre-cleaners, and there's a lot of different varieties of them that we offer and others do too. These are really for heavy dust environments where you can have large chunks of dust particulate that are, they're not the sub-micron size and kind of in that particle size range that Gabe was sharing in the earlier slide. These knock out the big chunks before you even get that air to the filter media itself and challenging it from the, protecting the filter media itself from a lot of dust challenge that you don't need to, right? These pre-cleaners can do their job.
Yeah. Yeah, and they range from like 85% efficient up to over 90, like up to 95, the really good ones.
Yep.
So they take out a lot of dust.
Yep.
All right, let me skip on ahead here.
They're the big dust, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
All right, here we go.
Here it is.
What everyone's been asking for.
We knew
for
this was
months.
coming, right?
I told you I would get you an answer sooner or later.
That's
It took
right.
me a
That's
while to
right.
get the right guys.
Yeah, so let's talk bypass for a minute. Here's bypass is done in different ways on different engines. It kind of depends on what you have, right? But here's typical. This is like average of what you got. You've got a couple filters on there on a diesel engine now. One of them is going to be running your what we call full flow, and then one of them's going to be running what we call a bypass flow. And simply what that means, I'll skip to the next little schematic here because this shows you what's going on. What that means is that you divert part of the flow through the bypass filter only. So in a normal operation, you're seeing about 10% of flow that's going through the bypass filter itself. And that bypass filter is typically going to have a little bit higher efficiency than the full flow filter. So it's doing like just a fine, we call it polishing of the oil, but it's getting it a little bit cleaner. Then the rest of that flow is going through your full flow filter. Now, you notice above that full flow filter, it says bypass valve. And there's different ways of doing that, but you're also going to have a bypass valve in that circuit. Sometimes it's built into the filter head. Sometimes it's built into the filter itself. But that's extra insurance. As a filter manufacturer, when we make a filter for any circuit, whether it's engine oil like this or hydraulic or fuel or whatever it is, we're adding restriction to flow, like we talked about in the beginning. And there's some situations where too much restriction can be devastating for that circuit, right? You starve a pump, like in a hydraulic circuit, and that's Matt's world here. Matt's our hydraulic guy. He can tell you you'll destroy that real pump
fast
if you starve it. Yeah. So we always have to not only just throw a filter in a circuit. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that. We have to design for that, and we work with and in an example like this, we work with the engine OE to figure out what needs to be done in that circuit. So our engineers work with their engineers and decide what that bypass needs to look at. And when it's built into the head, I brought another little visual for you. Let's see if we can get it on camera. I've got a filter head here. If I bring it up here, it's cut away. See this cutaway area?
Here. Uh-oh, nope. I was trying to get you there bigger again.
Oh.
There, we can do that. Here, look at this.
There we go.
There we go. So I'll kind of turn it a little bit so you can see what's going on. This would be the outlet of it. This would be the inlet. And your filter spins on down here. And what's going on is flow would come in, and you see this little red thing here. It's under spring tension. That's your valve. And if anybody knows anything about it's kind of like the way a relief valve works. A relief valve is set by a spring tension. Well, let's see if I can do it with my finger. If I push hard enough on it, can you see how it's opening up there? So if my filter that would be sitting on the bottom here gets totally plugged up, that could be devastating. We're not getting flow where we need to get flow. So now the differential to pressure is high enough, and we create enough pressure on this upstream side that we overcome that spring tension, and then your flow can go around that valve. So it's going to open up and allow flow through.
And so those bypass valves are really for if and when your filter reaches its end of life and you're still running your engine, you're not starving the engine for oil or any kind of lubrication. we'd rather pass through unfiltered oil than no oil itself and have a catastrophic failure. That's what those bypass valves are all about. Again, easy to make sure we're delineating the bypass valve against what the bypass filter circuit is in that schematic here too.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. That's
Easy
a
to
common
get them confused,
misconception,
Yeah.
right? Is that they're
Don't conflate.
different, and it's also, I think it's important to show that the bypass filter, that oil is just going back into the sump. The bypass
Correct.
filter oil, it doesn't go back to the engine, just goes right back into the sump. And the reality is, in my experience, is that that's valuable on a diesel engine if you're trying to go with longer oil drain intervals, because that bypass filter is good at removing soot. So it keeps the soot load low. Because in a diesel engine, the primary function, or the primary thing that causes wear in a diesel engine is the soot. That's why diesel oil turns black, is because there's dispersant chemicals in the diesel oil formulation that are designed to keep the soot suspended. Because if the soot isn't suspended finely, it kind of can chunk up together and become those big, like your dust particles, right? On the filter, right? They stick together. Well, when the soot all agglomerates into these big particles, now it generates abrasive wear. In fact, one of the big, really hard diesel engine tests to pass is the bore polishing test. So they preload the oil with soot. They put carbon black as a soot surrogate into the oil, so that you're making it harder to begin with already, right? Mr. Dyson, who worked at Cummins, he'll know about that one, right? So the soot is what you're trying to manage. So the bypass filter, when it can lower the level of soot in the oil, that allows for a longer drain interval. If you were just going to change your oil on a fixed short interval, you're wasting your time and money with one of these things. It's not ever going to give you any real benefit. Yeah,
well said. I'm seeing questions about, is it also for cold starts? And Lake's got some videos on that. He's done some work on it, and it's kind of interesting what he's found in his research. But there's going to be times when that might be a factor. Yeah, and Lake, maybe that's a chance for you to kind of talk about your research.
Yeah, so what we found doing engine oil testing on an engine without a bypass. So we removed the bypass valve from the system, and we're just measuring the pressure delta before and after the filter. Right? We can measure pressure upstream and downstream of the filter. What we found is that the flow rate is what actually causes the pressure differential to increase. So even with really, really cold oil, oil that is, at freezing or below freezing temperatures, even though that oil is super thick, the engine speed at startup is fairly low. So the output of the pump is low, but also because the pressure is high in the system, the pressure relief valve in the oil pump is bleeding off oil flow, so it doesn't overpressurize the system. So there's actually less flow going to the media. So there's actually a very low pressure differential when the oil is cold at low RPM. Inversely, when the oil is hot at high RPM, there's a much larger delta. And we got a video coming out in January that will show all of this and really dig into details. But that, you're here right now, you want an answer, that's the short and sweet of it.
Yeah, pretty interesting. But that is very, very true. A higher flow rate, that creates a bigger differential to pressure.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Does that help with bypass? Did we have any other questions on that?
I think we covered that pretty good.
I think so too. Yep.
Someone had asked an interesting question a minute ago. I want to talk about it. It goes back to air filtration for just a second, but I thought it was a great question. They said if I've got a lawnmower with a Donaldson air filter on it, and they're asking about pre-cleaner on that. And what's interesting is I don't think they come with a separate pre-cleaner. I may be wrong on that. I'd have to check with our team, but the housings on those, they're designed as a pre-cleaner. We didn't talk about that a minute ago, but if you look at your little housing on that mower, it's round like this, and the air filter sits inside, and the inlet to it is not directly on top, it's off to the side. Well, that creates that centrifugal force, that air to spin around inside the housing, and it forces the dust down to the bottom of the housing. And if you look on the bottom of your Donaldson air cleaner, you're going to see a little black. I actually brought one of these too. I brought a lot of visuals today. A little, what's called a evacuator valve. And that's one of these little things here. Kind of looks like a little duck bill, right? And it's open. See how it's soft and I can squeeze it open? Well, when your engine's running, that closes up because it's under suction and they're always facing down like this. So on your air cleaner, on your mower, that dust is getting forced down to this little thing, this little valve, and it's closed while the engine's running. And then when you shut down your mower and shut down the engine, it opens up. It just relaxes. Because see, when I'm not holding it open, how it's kind of hard to see, I guess, on camera.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can see it. Yeah.
You can see that,
You
yeah.
can see it. Mm-hmm.
So you actually do have a pre-cleaner built into the housing of that. So this, though, keep an eye on it. That's a service item, okay? You can run it for quite a while. I don't know how long yours is going to last, but they dry rot eventually, and they have to be able to be soft and close up. So you're going to want to change that out when it starts to feel like it's getting hard, or if it's got any cracks in it or anything, because it has to be able to close up. Otherwise, you're going to decrease the life of your air filter. So I hope that helps. That was a great question.
That's really good.
Question I saw here, and I saw it come up a couple times, about whether or not, here it is, why not just run the largest filter that you can put in the space available? And I think that really applies to probably both air and liquid filtration. Surface area is king, essentially, when it comes to restriction. So if you're trying to get longevity out of something, how much dirt you can pack into it before you hit the max restriction for whatever that application is, surface area is king. So there's really not necessarily any harm by going to a physically longer or bigger footprint for filter media. Just note that, especially in liquid applications, so if we're in like an engine oil or crankcase applications, you need to make sure that you size for the additional space, and you need to add more liquid for that. So if you went from, say, a 3-inch filter to a 10-inch filter, you got to add that much more liquid to that circuit to compensate for that. But otherwise, yeah, it's a really good lever to be able to pull to add more longevity to something, to be able to have either less frequent replacements or whatever you're looking for. But yeah, there's not really a downside on that.
Oil volume is your friend.
Yep.
Oil life is usually down to the oil to fuel ratio. The more oil you can put in your engine without being too hot hitting the crankshaft is usually a good thing.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and that's getting to be more popular in the aftermarket world, isn't it, Lake? On a lot of engines, yeah.
There's people who are coming up with different oil pans that have extended oil capacity, and then they got replacement filter replacement. They move the filter remotely so you can put a bigger filter in it, and all those kind of things. Those are all good. I know one of the questions, somebody asked a question about centrifugal bypass filters. I'm aware that they exist, but I have no personal experience with that, so I'm not going to touch that because that's not something that I have any.
Yeah, I don't think that's something we've encountered at Donaldson either.
Yeah, they're out there.
Yeah.
People experiment with different technologies, which is great. I mean, that's how you come up with new stuff. I think it's something that I know we've looked at it in the past. I don't know if it's a technology that works well enough to really explore. I think is It's
It
kind of the
comes
deal on that.
from when I've dug into it a bit. It comes down to kind of bang for buck. In order to do centrifugal oil filtration,
Yeah.
you need some pretty serious equipment in order to make that work correctly. I've seen them where they try to force flow to go through a certain way and make that work in liquid in a small package, but it's not very efficient. And at the end of the day, your money typically is better spent on a regular filter at that point in time than that. I see that a lot in really heavy duty industrial applications. Marine comes to mind, like tugboats and stuff like that. They do employ centrifugal, but they're offshore for months, right? And they've got a crankcase that is, you know, probably 40 barrels of oil, right? And so that makes sense. Most of us aren't driving around something with 40 barrels of oil in the crankcase, right? And so it doesn't make sense to really deploy those types of technologies to it, nor is there typically the space for it.
Yeah.
All right, so we got about 15 minutes left.
Okay.
You guys want to jump into fuel filters?
Yeah.
Because I know there's something that is important there. We obviously, Matt, you and I did the video before about fuel filters, and that's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Especially we have a global audience here, so that's one thing to keep in mind is we're not talking just about North American specs here. That we got people from literally Australia, Europe, Russia, all around the world watching right now.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see what we have next on the slides. Oh, perfect. I wasn't sure what was next. Yeah, this is here's a good visual to kind of kick that off. What you're looking at here is the actual, I guess you could call it particle size range. These are the sizes of particles that wear out modern high pressure common rail diesel injectors. Those particles are so small now that they're down to bacteria size. So between bacteria and red blood cell in size is that's the size of dirt that we worry about now, which is just mind-boggling, right? Because you keep in mind, you can't see smaller than 40 micron. That's what most of us can see. That's like a tiny little dust particle floating in the air. It's about 40 micron in size. So you're talking about this microscopic size stuff. If I go in the Wayback Machine, I was a mechanic working on off-road diesel engines. And on those older engines, the way we determine clean fuel, and you know, guys like Lake here's probably done this a million times. You sample fuel, you put it in a mason jar, and you hold it up and look at it, and you're looking for like big black chunks, right? And you go, oh yeah, that's either clean or not clean. There you go. There you go, Matt. But I can't do that now because I can't see bacteria size particles, right? And the reason for this, it's because engines have changed so much. And we'll tie it to autos here in a second because I like to tie stuff to cars for you guys. But with a diesel engine, these injectors now, they're running up to 40,000 PSI. That's to get a better combustion process. When a diesel engine goes down the road these days, it's a lot cleaner than it was 20 years ago. And that's one of the big reasons. They get a better combustion process. They also have exhaust aftermarket treatment systems on them, which are, I know, controversial because they're a pain, but they do clean the air. They work good. But with the injectors, that's why you've got such high pressure and such tight clearances inside those injectors. So 40,000 PSI in a tiny little space where a needle's moving real fast to give you your fuel metering. That's why clean fuel is needed. Cars, much more tolerant. You know, your gas engine's a lot more tolerant. You don't have to worry about having such clean fuel. And I think that's where some of the confusion comes in for folks. We were talking about this the other day, the differences in cars kind of behind the scenes, and Matt and I were chatting about it. And, you know, like I've got a gas engine that's a sports car, and it's a highly tuned engine. And the pressures on mine are just under 3,000 PSI at the injector, which is really high for a car, but that's nothing compared to 40,000 PSI. So that's a big difference between gas and diesel injectors.
And a little Matt, bit to compare that too is like, so he said about, I think he said 3,000 PSI. I've done some research. I think the highest injection pressure on a production car today for gasoline is up to 5,000. So somewhere in that 3,000 to 5,000 range is a kind of the upper echelon for gasoline today. If you think about kind of comparing that to diesel, that's roughly what the injection pressures were for diesel back in the 80s-ish time frame, right? And so how far we've moved, and gasoline has changed as well, right? We've moved our injectors from being in a throttle body to the manifold to now direct injected, where they're actually in the head themselves. And yes, we've moved a long way in gasoline as well, but we're still not at that level of atomization in a gasoline engine that's required in order to meet emission standards. So it's not quite there yet. So it's not as tolerant. Gasoline, there's also some other things. During the refinery process, it actually comes out cleaner, just straight out the refinery. It's at the top of, essentially, if you kind of look up the different steps, you've got kind of bunker and crude oil. You'll get diesel, you get kerosene, and then naphtha and gasoline up towards the top. Those fuels are thinner. You get particulate dropout much quicker. Gravity's on your side. So, I mean, realistically, even if, go fuel up from a normal filling station, gravity works really well to pull a lot of that particulate out. And you're not as susceptible. You don't have nearly the same type tolerances in a gasoline engine. So you don't necessarily have to protect it to that same level. Is there any harm in doing so? I get lots of questions a lot of time. Well, hey, I've got a diesel tank and a gasoline tank. If I'm doing this to the diesel, why don't I just do it to the gasoline? Absolutely. There's no harm in cleaning it further. It's just you're not really going to get the benefits out of what you put into it by cleaning it further than really where it needs to be for that application. But yeah, no harm can actually be done by employing the same filtration premises on gasoline.
Well, I think one of the interesting things to me about this slide is that you are actually using bacteria as a reference point. And what people may not realize is that there is bacteria in many fuel tanks.
Yeah.
If you've had the experience of going to a pump and you pull the handle and it's just painfully slow dispensing the fuel, a lot of times that's actually from bioaccumulation within the tank or within the lines of the tank.
Yeah, it definitely can be, and I think that's a great lead into a couple questions I just see about. I've seen about, hey, how good is fuel at the pump and different things like that. So yes, definitely within biodiesel, you can get bio growth that's inside of there. That can really only be present if there's moisture within that system as well, right? So those microbes need the water to feed on the fuel to screw everything up. So if you actually can get that fuel dry and eliminate water from your system, essentially that can't happen, right? So that'll be a barrier for any of that to occur. So that's really good. I think the other question was, how good is the fuel? Well, I guess I can speak to it from a particulate standpoint. Fuel chemistries vary all over the place across the country and across the world. But from a cleanliness standpoint, if we're talking about gasoline, most states adhere to a 10 micron, 50% efficient filter. So essentially, no matter what's in that tank that's underground at the filling station, when you open up that handle, there's a filter underneath that cabinet that is 10 micron, 50%. So essentially everything that's 10 micron and larger, it'll capture half of that. That's what's getting put into your gasoline engine. Oddly enough, for diesel, you would think, okay, we just showed you and told you that, hey, you got tighter restrictions, you have more sensitive components. Oddly enough, the typical standard for diesel is 30 micron, 50%. So it's a more open filter at a 50% efficient filter for a system which is much less tolerant to contaminant. And those are people in the high towers that make those decisions, and logic doesn't seem to come into play.
30 years ago, right, Matt? Before high pressure common rail.
And that's you make a really good point. There's a lot of things that are still within the industry today that are based off of, hey, this made sense 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and we just continue to go along with it.
I see it every day.
One of my favorite things to tell people is Diesel engines have changed so dramatically, and so has gasoline, but changed so dramatically in the last 20 years that you think we'd change the fuel standards along with it. But the same allowable amount of dirt and water content within fuel today is the same as it's been since the mid-70s, which is roughly about, what is it? I think a little over 1,000 times dirtier. The allowances today is over 1,000 times dirtier than what you need to have by the time you hit the injector. And that's just such a far wide range. It always blows my mind to just kind of think about that. Like, wow, we've come a long way, and yet we haven't done a whole lot about it.
And that's for the fuel spec here in the U.S., right?
Yeah, for the fuel spec here in the U.S. And realistically, most of our fuel specs today, as it sits today, in the last 15 years, things have kind of moved around and changed. But they're very similar when it comes to dirt. They're very similar with what you see in Europe, what you see in Australia, what you see in a little bit in South America. You see different chemistries across the world, different ppm of sulfur, different octane ratings, things like that. Yep. But dirt almost globally is at that same kind of level. Yeah.
Because I know one of the questions in the chat was about the chemistry of fuels being different around the world, and that's 100% fact. Like somebody asked, is that truth or myth? And like,
yeah, there's different levels and different things, and it gets a little confusing to read because some of it they're testing it this way but get the same outcomes, and you're testing it here a different way but you're getting very similar outcomes. But a lot of it from a chemistry standpoint can change and fluctuate a little bit. Probably the biggest change has been sulfur in the last 15 years. Right. Some parts of the world are still 5,000 ppm sulfur fuel or higher, right? Mm-hmm. More developed areas have gotten to 150 and down to 15 and kind of coming along. But yeah, like I think I saw somebody in the chat, European fuel is better. And that perception is typically because the octane ratings are higher with European fuels. Octane
on the gasoline
and
side,
cetane.
but also they have premium diesel as well.
Yes, right. So yeah, that exists there. I think it comes down a little bit more towards where their environmental ceilings, I guess, if you want to call it, are. And so, all right, this is where we want to hit. So they've created tighter fuel levels of where they need to be. Whereas in North America, it's kind of dragging behind there a little bit. But it seems like every time we decide that in North America we want to increase something, we kind of copy what Europe has done and paste it into our standards and just kind of copy and paste. So we usually drag behind 5 to 8 years, it kind of seems like, every time that there's kind of a new fuel standard.
There's one thing in the U.S. on the gasoline side, just from the chemistry side, there are at least 20 different specifications of gasoline, depending upon where you are in the country. Mm-hmm. Los Angeles, the South Coast area, LA, San Diego, that fuel is chemically different than, say, the fuel in Dallas, Texas, versus the fuel in Miami, Florida, versus the fuel in Detroit, versus the fuel in, say, Seattle, Washington. Those different areas, they change the chemistry based on not just the environment, but also other factors. So there's like boutique blends all around the country, which makes it kind of tough to compare what someone sees in East Coast versus West Coast, because the fuel's actually different.
Yeah, diesel's the same, and the big variance, there's an additive variance in them, but bio content is a big one for diesel. Yeah, and some areas have no bio mandate. Yeah, and then some areas have a high.
Yeah.
You drive through Illinois and Iowa, you're going to get a higher bio content.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's a big problem when you get, especially in the winter months, you get somebody that fills up with a high bio content, say in Missouri, and drives to, North Dakota, and that fuel doesn't work there, right? And there's a lot of variables out there across the interstates that can get you in real trouble if you're not paying attention to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.